Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the April 27th, 2017 meeting of the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District to order at 1 p.m. Ms. Markov, can we get a roll call, please? Ryan. All right, sir. Give us 1 second. All right, if we'd please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and after the pledge, then you're going to sit back down. We're going to do something in between. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. All right, I want the record reflect that all 9 council members are present. Before we get started, I do want to take a little bit of a personal privilege here. As you all know, we lost one of the individuals who have been at this council meeting and this port meeting since I've started. Mr. Mickey McCarthy passed away, unfortunately, within the last couple weeks. I know the parish president wants to lead us in a prayer, so when he gets back, we'll do that. But, you know, Mickey obviously has had some issues with the port, but he kept us on our toes. He really did. And we appreciate citizens like that. He did a good job with, communicating with me externally on issues that he had. I think he's always had an opportunity to voice his opinion, and he did so at the last council meeting. He was a good guy for the parish, someone who really was passionate and cared a lot for this community and cared for the port. So I'm going to open it up to the floor before we go with the prayer, but if anybody has any other comments or anything to say in regards to Mr. McCarthy, table. Mr. Russo?
Yes, I also would like to offer my condolences to Mr. Mickey and the family. Mr. Mickey was well-intentioned, unfortunately was underfunded. He had big dreams with no funding that ever came through, but he did bring a lot of good ideas, and as Mr. Juneau always said, he wished he would have been about 50 years old to see if some of these dreams would have come true. But he was an individual that really was well-intentioned, and I offer my condolences to the family.
Anyone from else from the table, Ms. Salvant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I too would like to extend my condolences to the family on behalf of Mr. McCarthy and his passing. And I just want to say that I was touched when I learned of his passing, because as Bo just said, he was very concerned about improving this parish. You know, I always referred to him and told him that he was a walking library on port relations. You know, you can, anything you wanted to know about the development of a port, he had answers, or he can tell you stories about it. It was just an untimely death for him. I had no idea. Matter of fact, I was in the Port Sulphur area when I learned of his passing. And it kind of shocked the community. He was a constituent in my district, and I can tell you he's going to be sadly missed. And from seeing his face every day, every month at the council meeting. So again, my condolences to the family.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Mr. Juneau?
Yes, I'd also like to extend my condolences And again, like Benny said, I wish he would have been 50 years old or a lot younger, because he had some great ideas. And a man like that, you can't never replace, because was so intelligent that he scared you. But I want to extend everything to his family.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I have a comment. First of all, I would like to say that in the spirit of a man, he is a true Plaqueminian. He represents Plaquemine as a whole, not by section, not by the way we do representative district. And he did it in a global sense. And his mission was to improve a way of life in Plaquemine. And he was trying to get it organized and started that way. It would impact the whole parish, and also it would impact the people in the parish to give them jobs or better jobs and being able to have a better way of life financially. So that in itself speaks for what he lived for at the time he was here. And I applaud him as he reaches the gates of heaven, because there is nothing negative that I can see where he would deny him the pearly gates of sitting next to the Lord himself. Even Peter, we'd be there waiting on him. The day he died, I'm sure, he was at the gate waiting for his soul. So with that in saying, the family, you have nothing to be sorry about. Just understand to worship and praise the time that he had here with us and understand his mission and try to fulfill those that he haven't. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone from the audience want to make any comments? If not, I will.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, I just want to say Mr. Mickey had occasion to catch a ride with me back and forth to Port Sulphur sometimes, and I had a lot of occasions to speak with him, and we became friends, and he was a friend, and I'm going to miss him, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
So, Ms. Wilcox?
I would first thank you. I've known Mickey since 2008, and he was very passionate about the parish, and he took a lot of flack. Nobody deserves to die alone, and he thought that this was his family, and he enjoyed being here. We went to Mr. Metcalf when his electricity got turned off a couple weeks ago, and Mike immediately helped him, and I thanked him for that, because nobody has ever treated somebody so quickly and with such compassion that day. He couldn't live without electricity, and he still doesn't have electricity, but they did what they could to get it hooked up temporarily, and for that I thank him very much. And as much as he argued with you, he liked you, and he always spoke about you. And like I said, Bo, thank you for listening when I called and acknowledging him, because that's all he ever wanted, was to just be treated equally. And I think that his ideas are great, but he just wanted what was best. So I thank you for recognizing him.
Sure. Before I turn it over to the parish president for his comments and prayer, as a fellow Irishman, I'll end it on at least the council's comments on this. It's an old Irish blessing, and this is for Mr. McCarthy. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hands. Thank you. If you would please, Mr. President, you have a couple comments, and then we'll stand for the prayer.
Mr. McCarthy was a friend, and he will be sorely missed. And yes, I'd like to have a moment of prayer.
If you please stand for the official prayer.
May the soul of Mr. Mickey McCarthy and of all of our loved ones and cared for ones, may they rest in the peace of Christ. For all eternity. Amen.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for those who spoke those kind words. We have no executive session, which is item 2. We'll move to item 3, the status report by the Executive Port Director, General Sanders.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the Port Board. I am Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, which follows is my Executive Director report for the reporting period of 24 March to 26 April. I will be brief today because my chairman told me to.
You're welcome, folks. Yeah.
During this time frame, the port, in conjunction with the port's strategic partner, American Patriots Holding, had a joint media day to announce support in APH's partnership, plus the anticipated port build-out and the waterborne service provided by APH. The APH vessel design is revolutionary and game-changing as far as the onward movement of cargo utilizing the inland waterborne system to serve the Mississippi River Basin, and it will have a benchmark as the port will emerge as the Gulf Coast gateway port to the Midwest. The port finalized a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Parish Sheriff's Office regarding the Mobile Command Center. This vehicle was awarded to the port via a Homeland Security grant, and a better use of the vehicle would be under the operational supervision of the sheriff. In the event we have an emergency and a disaster, the sheriff would be the quarterback, along with, obviously, the parish president. But this vehicle would be better served under his operational overwatch. Also, it will be exercised more regularly than under the port, and it seats 10 folks. 7 of those 10 will probably be sheriff's folks. The port would certainly have a person on that vehicle, but that way we exercise the right personalities with the capabilities that that vehicle offers. We had a joint meeting with American Patriot Holdings and the port with the Maritime Administration in Washington, D.C. The MARAD is very interested in the port's build-out and the APH vessel, as the MARAD has been a longtime champion of utilizing the inland waterway system to deliver goods to the heartland of America and to alleviate congestion on the highways. One shipload of American Patriot's vessel takes 1,700 trucks off the road. The MARAD also has many grants and initiatives that both the port and APH can take advantage of, and we obtain seed money for planning. We are seeking to obtain seed money for planning and construction. It was a very productive meeting, and they gave us the ABCs of many low-hanging fruit grants that we are actively pursuing, which leads up to my third point. We had a follow-up meeting with the RPC that is assisting us in obtaining planning money for our bankable feasibility. The port performed a pre-feasibility test, which gave us a green light that we were headed in the right direction. However, to obtain a strategic development partner, they are not going to take your in-house feasibility to determine if they're going to invest in your project. It takes a bankable feasibility, a third-party feasibility test. These tests go anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million, and the port is actively pursuing grant money for that planning endeavor. As a result of the coverage from the media day, we were visited by Mr. Scott Sigmund, the Executive Director of the Illinois Soy Association, and in 2 weeks, Michael Steenhoek, his counterpart, with the Iowa Soy Association, and Mr. Steenhoek also is the Executive Director of the 10 states conglomeration that make up the Midwest for soy and corn. They're excited about how the farmers can save a tremendous amount of money with their transportation costs, which is the bulk of their costs in delivering their product around the world. They are also arranging meetings with the co-ops. They have also assisted us in arranging meetings with the executive directors of the ports of Memphis, St. Louis, and Chicago. This is very important because we have identified these distribution aggregation cities along the Mississippi River to command and control the entire Mississippi Basin, as we as the southern terminus will be the anchor as we perform a Gulf Coast gateway port. We met with the Naval Air Station, JRB CO, and Bruce Keller as well as the RPC and members of the consulting team called TMG, the Mumphrey Group. The base CO wants to deliver the product to Big Navy on 1 August. We have backed off that date, done backwards planning. We will have the submission to him by 1 July. We did a backwards planning exercise, came up with the many other things that needed to be with that submission. So I will be getting letters of support from our neighboring parishes, to include Plaquemines Parish, from our state and federal congressional delegations, from the governor and lieutenant governor's office. Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions or comments, this concludes my brief.
Thank you, Sandy, and I appreciate you guys' participation in Plaquemines Day last week. I'm sure we have a little bit more comment about that later on, but the job well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I'd like to recognize my staff for what they did, and also Chris Leopold for taking the initiative to have the state legislature recognize John Pennison for his duty to our port and our parish.
Thank you. Anyone from the table have any questions? Any comments? Anyone from the audience? All right, if not, we will move to item 5, introduction of ordinances and resolutions. I have 2. A resolution approving and authorizing Mr. William Black, Port Committee Chairman, Maynard J. Sanders, Port Executive Director, and Shambo Riley, Port Controller, to execute a Louisiana compliance questionnaire to Camden and Company CPAs, and otherwise to provide with respect thereto. A resolution authorizing Maynard Sandy Sanders as Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District to enter into an agreement with Trident Holdings Incorporated for the continued implementation of the Port's 2010 Master Plan for 2 years, and otherwise to provide with respect thereto.
I have none.
I have none.
Have none.
With none, we'll move to item 6B.
A resolution authorizing and directing Maynard J. Sandy Sanders, Executive Director of the Plaquemines Port Harbor and Terminal District, to enter into an employment contract for services as Deputy Port Director between Plaquemines Parish Port Harbor and Terminal District Port and Paul Matthews by signing the employment contract, authorizing and directing the Executive Director to sign the documents and to enter into the contract by the close of business on April 28, 2017, and otherwise provide with respect thereto.
I will offer it. Ask for a second. Second by Mr. Lapine. Any questions or comments from the table? From the audience? Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, Warren Lawrence, 120 Timber Canal, Myrtle Grove. Just would like to voice my objection to the resolution. I think it's just for my opinion, is a waste of money. We talked to the administration of the parish on how to reorganize and work within your means, and we're not an operating port, we're forming a port, and it's just my opinion that it's not needed. It's nothing against this Mr. Paul Matthews. I don't know him from Adam, but I think you should go back to the drawing boards and work within your own means, and we're laying off people in this parish. We're cutting other people's salaries, and here we are hiring people. And one thing I would like to say, it doesn't say in here, would it just put for the record the amount on the contract and how much, what is the length of the contract? Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's noted. Any other comments from the audience? If none, we'll open for a vote, please. Let the record reflect that the resolution passes 9-0. Before we move any further, I'd like to have, I'm gonna get to your, I'm gonna open it up to General Sanders to do the introduction of Mr. Matthews, and if you wanna maybe address Mr. Lawrence's question in that introduction, it's basically 120,000, but I mean, Mr. Sanders is that sufficient, or you wanna elaborate a little bit more?
It was a 3-year contract at 120 per. Benefit package is the same as every employee at the port. Well, he has health insurance. He's can take advantage of payroll deduction, different health insurances, and personal life insurance, and anything else you want to add? Dental, vision.
Yeah, let's get him a dollar figure later on in the thing. Let's move forward. Go ahead and open up with your introduction.
At this time, I would like to invite Paul Matthews forward, have him say a few remarks, and then we'll sign this contract. Paul, would you step forward?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate it. I want to thank first the council. Thank you so much for your literal vote of confidence in me to serve as Deputy Port Director for the Port of Plaquemines. First, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Mr. Pennison and the wonderful job that he did in this role for so many years. And I'm very grateful for his service and his efforts. And I'm really excited to work with our staff and Sandy and also with our council. So from this day forward, I'm excited to be here at Plaquemines Port and excited about the opportunities that we have, obviously, with building a terminal, the APH meeting and announcement that was a few weeks ago. It really is just an exciting time for me and my family, and what we plan on doing here at Plaquemines Port Authority. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. On behalf of the Port Committee and the Council, I'd like to welcome you aboard. It's, for those of you who have been following this whole process, it was a very lengthy nationwide search, which we narrowed it down to about 6 candidates, stretching from all the way from Seattle to Tampa, and we wound up getting somebody, fortunately local, with a great deal of experience, and it was a really, really stringent process. I think they had, we had folks who were port directors, we had folks who were retired Navy captains. It was a very intensive interview process, and you did a remarkable job. I'll say that. We're very fortunate to have you on board. Before we take a photo, I'll open it up to anybody else on the council who wants to make any comments. And I do appreciate my colleagues on the council who participated in the interviewing process. It was a long, I guess, 8-hour day, and I think we were very fulfilled after that particular interview process. So, Mr. Lapine?
Yes, sir. Paul, I sat in, and I sat with actually Mr. Juneau and Mr. Black in the interview room, and I think I conveyed these thoughts after I saw you that, I really think you missed your calling, because I think you could have been a motivational speaker or a coach or something, because after you finished the interview, you really wanted to run through the wall with you, so, but it was a lengthy process. We did have some very, very good candidates. Also, it made me a little nervous. Some of the candidates were Navy candidates, and we have an Army general running, so I'm kind of glad we picked you, Paul, because I didn't think the Navy and the Army would kind of jive. So, but I really do. I'm really impressed with you, Paul. I see a bright future for the port. You're a wonderful guy, a great candidate, and welcome aboard.
Ms. Williams?
Welcome aboard, Mr. Matthews. You have an extensive resume and a great amount of knowledge to offer, and I look forward to working with you.
All right, anybody from the audience, or if not, I would just say I hope you brought all your top secret information from the Port of New Orleans with you to share with us and help us improve our operations. If not, welcome aboard and congratulations. We'll take a brief moment just to get a picture with all the council. And Mr. Salva, you need? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll grab a photo and to business. All right, thank you, council. Thank you, Paul. We appreciate it. I'm happy to have you aboard. I'll get to work. All right, we'll move to item 7A. We have none. 7B.
State Coastal Master Plan briefing by Richie Blink, Councilmember Black.
Yeah, Richie, for those of you who were there on Thursday on Wednesday at the PABI luncheon, he provided a similar briefing. Phenomenal brief Richie does. This is a guy, a local guy who is pretty much the know-it-all, I guess, when it comes to, oh, you were on the spot. He knows what he's talking about, so pay attention to this brief and let's see what we got to say. Richie, it's all yours.
Great. So I'm Richie Blink with the National Wildlife Federation, and I'm here representing an organization called Restore the Mississippi River Delta, an organized effort among 5 groups that are fully focused on helping Louisiana maintain as much of its coastal area as possible. The title of the organization really comes from the fact that all the land in South Louisiana was created from sediment from the Mississippi River. The land we live on, this delta, is really a gift from the river. Next slide, please. The groups involved are the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, the National Audubon Society, and the Environmental Defense Fund, also the National Wildlife Federation. In addition, this core group works almost daily with other organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, the Louisiana Wildlife Federation, Restore Retreat, and others. Working together, we're able to bring science, economics, policy, and advocacy to bear both here in Louisiana and also in Washington, D.C. We began doing this work around the time of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Among the 5 groups, we have about 40 people working on this here in New Orleans. Next slide. So a little bit about myself. I live down in Empire, and I've been involved with restoration efforts here in Plaquemines for quite a few years now. I planted about 15,000 bald cypress trees here in Parish, and my dad is a commercial fisherman. He's a shrimper down in Empire. I spent my summers growing up on his shrimp boat, learning about how land is created and destroyed in the estuary here. In my role as the Plaquemines Community Outreach Coordinator, I help residents and businesses understand the importance of having a sustainable river delta, something we all need for our long-term prosperity. In addition to this work, I'm a board member of PABI and the Woodlands Conservancy. And when I'm not out in the community working on these issues, you could find me out in the bayou. Next slide. So today I want to talk to y'all about the coastal challenges we face, but also about the progress the state has made in dealing with these challenges and how we can go forward together. And I hope I leave you with a sense of not just the challenges, but while those are very real, also the possibilities as well. Next slide. So let's start with the challenges, or as Coach O likes to call it, Tell the Truth Monday. So as you all know, Louisiana has lost close to about 2,000 square miles in the last 80 years or so, and that's represented as red on this chart here. And without action, we stand to lose another 2,000 square miles by 2100, or roughly another 80 years. And so here's what we look like today. And you can see that the classic Louisiana shape, what you see on maps and cartoons and koozies, isn't really there anymore. We're no longer the boot. We're more like the skeleton in the boot. Next slide. And here's what we look like by the year 2100 without significant actions being taken. This last slide is from what's called the bathtub model, and it's from a study done in 2011. It's simplistic in that it basically takes the current map and adds 3 feet of water to it. And it's pretty representative, but you get the idea. So the causes of land loss are many, and we can go through those as you like. But what I really want to talk to you about today is the solutions. Those things that we can do with help from others to push back against coastal land loss and to protect our future here. The things that we can do are numerous too. And so the principal place where those solutions are being developed is within the state's coastal master plan. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. The coastal plan for Louisiana was first developed in 2007 after Hurricane Katrina, when the state moved to reorganize parts of government around the needs of coastal restoration and protection. A law was set up in which a planning process was required to be updated every 5 years as new science and technologies become available. And so, assuming for planning purposes that we could put $50 billion into this effort over a 50-year time frame. Next slide. So the master plan, next slide, please. Thanks. The master plan is fundamentally science-based and something I think that Louisiana could be really proud of. And here are some of the different areas of expertise that went into the coastal master plan. Next slide. So as our science is expanded and refined, and we gain experience with projects on the ground and technological innovations, the plan is updated every 5 years to reflect that knowledge. And if we and the state are doing our jobs, each master plan is going to build upon the previous one. And there will be some changes from plan to plan. So with each new planning process, that takes this new information on land subsidence or sinking, sea level rise, projected storm frequency and intensity, and also other factors, and incorporates those into several scenarios that are run through supercomputer models to see how all those factor together and impact the coast. The modeling is used to create our best estimates of a future without action. In short, the current maps of our future coast without action reflect what we've already known and acknowledged for decades, that we're in the midst of a coastal crisis that threatens our economy, our culture, and our coastal ecosystem. Here are the maps. Here are maps of 3 scenarios that the state has been using for these planning purposes. Here you can see the progression of scenarios from low to high, or said another way, from best case to worst case scenario as we see it today. And this is the reality that we face on the ground. And so this is under the low case scenario at year 2067, so in 50 years. Next slide. This is the medium case scenario that we're facing. And this is the high case scenario that we're facing. And the state is currently planning for the medium case scenario. So without action, Louisiana could lose a total of 4,000 square miles over the next 50 years without action. But with action, by implementing the Coastal Master Plan, we could reduce that land loss by 1,000 square miles. So, which brings us to the second part of the planning process, and what's really critical in terms of progress, which takes projects that have been proposed and developed, whether from local or the state level, and uses these computer models to assess how those projects are going to stand up over time against the challenges that we're facing. And this is for what's called the restoration part of the plan, and that covers projects like barrier islands, marsh creation projects, sediment diversions, and others. That assessment is done by looking at how those projects do in terms of building land and flood risk reduction. Those 2 metrics, land building and flood risk reduction, are the fundamental metrics against which every project is measured. And in short, the projects that do the best over time are the ones that make it to the Coastal Master Plan. So some of the, I'm sorry, one more. So some of the projects to be constructed in Plaquemines include $700 million worth of marsh creation projects, which is known as dredging. And those will be done on both the east and the west banks of the river. There's going to be numerous ridge restoration projects on both the east and the west bank of the river. 2 large sediment diversions, mid-Breton and mid-Barataria, to sustain those new features and protect our communities, as well as non-structural mitigation such as flood-proofing of businesses, elevating homes, and voluntary buyouts are also featured in the plan. Next slide. And so this project was built down in Buras in 2006, and it utilized earthen terraces. And what was going on, sediment was flowing into this photo from left to right, and these terraces would actually serve as speed bumps. And what they would do is they would create turbulence in the water, and sediment would then fall down onto the bottom. So this project was created for $1.6 million, and it was built over about 3 months' time in the summer of 2006. The next slide is the same project in 2014. You can see how land is actually showing up outside of the project footprint in this photograph, and this is directly across from Buras. And so, next slide, please. And so, here's another example of a private restoration project that utilized the land building potential of the river just across from Venice. And you can see there's a new subdelta forming in the middle of this pond. And what was going on here, the water in the foreground is actually the Mississippi River, and in the very background of the photo, that's the Gulf of Mexico, or Breton Sound. Baptiste Colette is the river running through the top right-hand corner of the photo. And so the next slide was from, this was from February of 2013, and the next slide is from October of 2014. So you can see, this cut was dug in 2004, so it took 10 years for land to start showing up, but once it did, it really showed up quick. In the next slide, it was just 2 years later, from October of 2016. So you can see, if we go back 2 slides, please, Jenner, you can see just how much land was formed in a short amount of time. You can go back down. So this entire pond was filled in a relatively short amount of time, and small projects like this need to be the equivalent of cutting grass on the levee, necessary maintenance that we need to do here to protect our communities and enhance our already good quality of life. Next slide, please. And so these projects fit into what's called the multiple lines of defense strategy. And these restoration projects are meant to work kind of in sequence with one another that are included in this plan. So there's 2 halves to the multiple lines of defense strategy, or really 3. There's restoration projects, so for instance, restoring barrier islands, building a marshland bridge via the sediment pumping, rebuilding of the natural ridges, hydrologic restoration, and then structural projects like floodgates, pumping stations, levees, and then in elevated buildings, which would be non-structural. Next slide, please. So, of course, the plan is limited by the amount of money and sediment that the state expects it could reasonably receive over the next 50 years. And you can see structural protections like levees and non-structural, between those and restoration, the amount of money is spent roughly 50-50, $25 billion on those 2. Next slide, please. So let me talk about money for a minute or two. And in short, while the planning process is extremely solid and likely to continue to produce a powerful set of projects over time, it's even more remarkable that we have a significant amount of money to do this work. Through the Deepwater Horizon related fines and funding, we have an unprecedented opportunity to build a strong foundation for our coastal program here. This money averages over $500 million every year for the next 15 years. Of course, we need to make sure this funding is protected and identify future funding streams for this work over time. We currently don't have anywhere near enough to do all the work we need to do over the next 50 years, but we have enough to really move ahead, and now is the time to do that. Next slide, please. And so, without question, as you can see in the red maps, the implementation of the master plan is urgent, and it offers a way to transition our valuable coastal resources into a much better future. We and others are working to make it as good as we can, and we're doing that with a great sense of urgency. It's something citizens need to be engaged with. And the future of the coast, it's not hopeless, but it's not easy, but it is possible, and time is definitely of the essence. Next slide. So, any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Richie. I do have a couple questions to follow up because I just read a letter that's being passed around for council's signature in reference to being asking the governor to pretty much reconsider Mid-Breton and Mid-Barataria and instead be in support of pipeline sediment diversions. Can you give me your opinion on that?
So sediment diversions are a cornerstone of the Coastal Master Plan. All of South Louisiana, pretty much from Baton Rouge south, was built by the Mississippi River over time. I could understand why people would have questions about diversions. Most folks that are using the basins, what's going on is the levee has kept sediment out of the basins for the last 80 years. So we have 3 generations of industry that have come up using the basins in the current salinity envelope that they're already in. So folks are used to things as they are. They're used to shrimping or oystering in a degraded delta. In the past, oysters were caught further towards the beach, shrimp maybe a little further out. So people have been accustomed to a little bit different way of doing business. Just in my lifetime, oyster boats have evolved from high-bowed boats with big cabins that could sleep 3 people because they had to go way out and spend 2 or 3 days out on the reefs out in Breton Sound. Now, these oyster boats have outboard motors and they come in every night because the oysters are found right by the back levee. So, I could understand why people would be maybe opposed to diversions, but as you can see from the photos that I showed earlier, the river has a massive potential to build land, and the Coastal Master Plan lays out very clearly that it's not an either-or option. We have to be doing everything we can to try and save the coast and protect our communities and protect the critical infrastructure that Sandy's working on. So, while there's almost $1 billion of marsh creation projects here, dredging, there's also going to be 2 diversions here to sustain that, because as soon as you do a dredging project, that project begins to actually sink. So those projects are only good for about 20 or 30 years. It's kind of a one-and-done thing. But with a diversion running into the area and bringing that sediment every year when the river floods, that will be able to sustain those projects over time. So,
I want,
All right, thank you. Yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah.
Respond to your question, because thank you for your great job with your presentation. But I think the question, Councilman Black, is that, and I don't know if you're aware of it, I know you sent a letter to governor, but the engineering firm, them have been paid a considerable amount of money already on this project. And so when you're talking about coming this late in a project, I don't know how successful the government would be, because I questioned this in the very beginning, how much money was spent just in engineering, in engineering this project up front, even before the project started. So I don't know how successful that would be. And the reason why I also came up, because for the last 8 years, I've been begging this council to have a meeting with the council members and the executive about the Coastal Master Plan, because we have been going to Washington, D.C. for over 10 years on talking about community involvement, but there was never the executive and legislative government in Plaquemines Parish, unlike any other government, wasn't on the same page. You look at St. Tammany, you look at St. Bernard Parish, their legislature was meeting. And I love one thing Billy Nunn did was when he brought settlement diversion, but he was acting as a solo artist, and he wasn't meeting with the council, and it was a separate thing. So I just think that I hope that this letter is good, but I hope the council really becomes serious about meeting with the executive branch, meeting with the coastal board that we have, and meeting with the zoning director, meeting with the Pope, and having a workshop where you really look at all these projects. Because I think when Benny came to the thing over at the riverfront, I think it was you, Benny, that made a statement how we lost some money in some project. So I just think that Councilman Black, there needs to be a move to really look at every project, and you might be successful, but from where I'm staying, and I think because of $1 million that have already been put into the engineering firm for Breton Sound, you might be a little too late.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and that's why I'm kind of questioning the letter, and somewhat hesitant to sign it, because I'm not sure if we're sending mixed signals to the governor's office, or are we sending mixed signals to the federal government.
So, I'm not familiar with the letter you're exactly talking about, but St. Bernard recently sent a letter to the governor urging him almost to rescind a letter that he had actually wrote to President Trump supporting these projects and trying to get the permitting process fast-tracked. If Plaquemines Parish sent a letter to the governor saying that, we don't like your ideas, that might be, that might not make him too happy.
Ms. Williams, do you mind if I read the letter? Do you want me to read it?
yeah, you can, well, let me state the intent of the letter. I received an email from the Louisiana Shrimpers Association, and it accompanied the letter from St. Bernard, asking for our support as well, piggybacking similar to the letter that St. Bernard sent. My concern with the diversions is how is it going to affect our local businesses, commercial fishing, oyster fishermen, and things of that nature. I do understand, and I'm in agreement we need coastal restoration, don't get me wrong, but I don't want it to be at the cost of putting our locals out of business.
Yeah.
So you can read the letter, you have it over there? It's just kind of, it's similar to the one, and I don't know if you read the one that St. Bernard sent to the governor?
I have seen that letter. So,
So what is, how are these diversions going to affect the commercial fishing industry? That's my concern.
So what we already know is that, regardless of action, the basins are already changing.
Right.
And if we do nothing, there's going to be a collapse of commercial fishing. What's going on is, for example, the marsh face. So the very edge of the marsh is the most productive area. That's where, small, juvenile fish are spawning, shrimp are spawning, and as the marsh washes away, we no longer have that marsh face and we have open water areas. So over time, the productivity of the fishery is going to go down without action. With action, things might change a little bit, but overall, we can expect to gain land
right.
and
There's no guarantee.
reduce risk. I think what needs to be said is we need to have a sustainable commercial fishing industry. We need to keep people employed, but there needs to be a just transition for those folks. There's going to be changes, and I think as leaders, that is something that y'all should absolutely be asking for.
Right, and all these diversions intended to be controlled. Because
Yes.
I think with controlled diversions, and if you control them when the shrimp are moving and the oysters are harvesting and things of that nature, it could lessen the impact on the industry.
Absolutely. So some colleagues of mine have been involved with what's called an operations working group, and they've been working with scientists and the state to develop a further an enhanced operations plan. So, for instance, in the wintertime, oysters are able to handle colder, fresher, are able to handle fresher water, so the diversion can actually be operated on, say, the rising peak of the river, and also there's a benefit there that there's more sediment in the river while the river's on the rise. It's very similar to driftwood in the river. If anybody has any experience in the river, when the river's on the rise, the driftwood comes off the banks. Well, the same is true for the sediment. So the sediment can be captured on the rising limb of the river, and then once the river begins to go down, the diversions could be shut down or the flow can be reduced through those diversions. And so the diversions will be operated first to build land, but secondly, to reduce impacts to fisheries, to enhance the fishery.
And has anyone sat down with commercial fishermen? They live this day in and day out. No disrespect to scientists and the experts, but, like you said, your dad was a commercial fisherman, you grew up on the water.
Yes.
They know I feel that they know the impacts that the industry is going to face in reference to this. Have they been involved in these discussions, and has their concerns been heard?
So,
Many times.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman,
So-
comment.
There's
Hold on
many
one second.
meetings, there's
Richie,
lots of
hold on,
back and
Richie,
forth.
Richie, hold on.
Into the discussion to support Ms. Williams, prime example is Mardi Gras Pass. When Mardi Gras Pass came into play, it destroyed the oysters industry on the east side of Plaquemines Parish. There are no seed oysters no more because of the Mardi Gras Pass that had breached, and we never did anything about it to stop it or slow it down so where we can have a mixture. And the other component, the land, whatever, the settlement that it built in navigational waters to couldn't have constraints on that. Then the other thing, it impacted the gas line. There's a big 16-inch gas line that this thing is running, eroding the land away from it because of the pressure, the volume that is coming through Mardi Gras Pass. It's eating away there. It's not building there because it doesn't settle. Okay? Then you have power lines that go across Mardi Gras Pass that fell into the water. And that could have been very dangerous for somebody crossing in there, and that thing hit and could kill them. So, but the thing I'm saying is that when the diversion there did not help anything, and it even destroyed the industry, the fishing industry, which is terrible, not only for us, but as well for the state of Louisiana. And that's a fact. There's nothing can be said but that. That's a fact.
Mr. Black?
Ms. Sullivan.
Yeah, to answer your question, Ms. Williams, in regards to
I know they're
the
involved,
local
but are they being
fishermen,
heard?
but what I'm about to say is that, yes, the local, every meeting that I've attended with Mr. Blinken, the local in Baton Rouge, wherever the meeting was, the local fishermen was very involved and verbal. But now the question becomes, are they
being
listening?
heard? Right, that's my question.
Are they listening? But they are very, very vocal on their opposition against
The
diversion.
large-scale diversion.
Yes.
And I don't think they would be against controlled diversions if it would not affect, their catch and things in their livelihood.
I think there's, other things to be thinking about and be, asking about. While the patterns of commercially sought-after species of seafood may change, there's other mitigation, opportunities. For instance, some boats could be lengthened. If folks have to go further to catch oysters, maybe their boat could be cut in half, 10 feet could be added to it. They could put, a more fuel-efficient engine, bigger fuel tanks, and and a cooler. And
So
maybe
you do
there
feel
could
that
be
these diversions are going to have an
opportunities.
impact on the industry?
They could be opportunities for that. My dad is a shrimper. He says, if the year that they open mid-Barataria diversion is going to be his best white shrimp season ever. He's going to catch less brown shrimp, but he's going to be catching more white shrimp. So while there be differences, I can't tell you what exactly they'll be. And
No one knows.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
If I just want to say this, because I think what you have going on when you talk about fishermen, you have the folks with larger boats who have one position, and the local fishermen who don't have the boat that he's talking about can go out. Let me just say, at YMCA in Post Alpha, the University of New Orleans did a study for a whole year where they met with local fishermen at the YMCA in Post Alpha, and they came from Grand Bayou, a lot of places, was really talking about the diversion, and the problem is freshwater versus saltwater. And so you had fishermen with different positions. So if you got large boats, then that's no problem, because you can go out in these other. But the local fishermen had problems with some of the diversion, because if you didn't control when the freshwater came in, the saltwater come in, it was cause a problem. As Mr. Solomon say, there is no marshes on these banks of the river, zero, and then they haven't crossed the river, is the only place they can catch it. So again, when you hear people talking about diversion, you got to understand what position they're coming from when they talk about it. That's why I say it's very important that this council and executive get together with all the folks so you can hear both sides of the story. And when you take your position, you're taking it from hearing from different sides, and not just from my perspective, not from his perspective, but you're getting it from people on both sides.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments.
I agree.
I'm going to conclude this discussion. We're going to open it back up, possibly at the council meeting and at a later date, Mr. Chairman, because although it does tie into a lot of issues with the port, I think it's more beneficial for the entire council in that particular forum to have this debated. This is a letter to the governor. I think it's an important letter, but I think we need to have some discussion on it prior to it being sent. I'm not sure if a resolution is going to be attached to this.
Well, we'll discuss it after.
Okay. All right, with that, I'll close out. Thank you, Richie, for your presentation, and thank you for your comments. I think it really opened some good discussion. With that, we will move to item 8.
Approval of the February 23rd, 2017 meeting minutes.
I'll offer act for a second. Second by Mr. Lapine. The meeting minutes are approved 8-0. Mr. Edgecombe is absent. Ask for a motion to adjourn. Make a motion for Mr. Lapine, seconded by Mr. Burt. Machine's open. The port meeting is adjourned at 1:58.